I think we will get going. So I want to take this opportunity to welcome everybody to our virtual town hall with Marilyn Gladu. For those who do not know me, I am Carrie McEachran. I am the CEO with the Sarnia Lambton Chamber of Commerce. I still think I'm fairly new, and I'll probably be saying that for the next 5 to 10 years that I'm the new CEO. But I've been here almost a year now. We're thrilled to have such a great turnout. We had almost 70 registered for today to attend. We have chamber members, we have community members, some dignitaries, local media here with us today. And this turnout really tells me that it's evident that the business community is very interested in the work that's being done on Parliament Hill on our behalf. And speaking of Parliament Hill, without further ado, I am honored to introduce our special guest, MP for Sarnia Lambton, Marilyn Gladu. Now, I know that many people know Marilyn, and I've known Marilyn a long time, but when I read her bio, I realized I didn't know Marilyn as well as I thought I did. So Marilyn is a professional engineer by trade who worked for Dow Chemicals for 21 years in a variety of roles locally and globally. Marilyn then became engineering manager and subsequently the director of engineering at Suncor before taking a consultant role at Worley Parsons. As a consultant, she has managed construction and commissioning teams, a team of over 100 engineers supporting the Shell refinery, and served as North American Business Director for Petrochemicals and Refining. She was named as a prestigious fellow by the Canadian Academy of Engineers. As the Member of Parliament for Sarnia Lambton since 2015, Marilyn received the Maclean's Award as most collegial parliamentarian, as voted by the other members of Parliament. She served as the official opposition science critic, as well as the chair for the status of women. And of course, my phone is ringing during a really bad timing for my phone to be ringing now. I apologize. She has served as the co-chair of the Parliamentary Rail Caucus, in addition to the vice chair of the Aerospace Caucus. She has also served as the Shadow Minister of Health and the vice chair of the Standing Committee on Health. As one of the most respected leading members of the current Parliament, Marilyn works cooperatively and respectfully with her parliamentary peers. In 2020, under the Conservative Party leadership of MP Erin O'Toole, Marilyn was named to the new Conservative Shadow Cabinet as the Shadow Minister for Federal Development Southern Ontario and Privy Council critic. She also won the most collegial parliamentarian award in 2020 for the year of 2019. Marilyn was re-elected to the 44th Parliament on September 20th, 2021 for her third term as Member of Parliament for Sarnia Lambton. She was later named Associate Shadow Minister of International Trade and Supply Chains. In 2022, under the leadership of Pierre Poilievre, Marilyn was named Shadow Minister of Civil Liberties, a portfolio about which she cares deeply. She is dedicated to upholding the rights and freedoms of Canadians. A special moment in her early political year would be that her private member's bill, C-277, on palliative care, received unanimous consent of the House of Commons and Senate. By achieving royal assent, her palliative care bill will now make a positive difference in the lives of millions of Canadians choosing to live as well as they can for as long as they can. Later, in 2022, Marilyn would become one of fewer than 50 MPs ever to have a second private member's bill passed, Bill C-228, on pension protection. The bill is currently before the Senate as of early 2023. Marilyn designed the bill with the goal of protecting the pensions and financial security of those who have worked their whole lives. Marilyn has the ability to work with multiple levels of government, NGOs, and industry associations to achieve good outcomes for our community and our country. She is focused on creating economic opportunities, standing up for seniors, and working with other community leaders on local priorities. She takes great honor in representing Sarnia Lambton and using her years of vast experience to ensure that our community's best interests are always taken forward as strongly and capably as possible to our nation's capital, Ottawa. She's also the proud mom of 2 daughters. So I am, without further ado, Marilyn, I am going to pass this over to you. Marilyn will provide some brief remarks to us before we jump into the really great questions that were sent to the chamber in advance. And just to let everyone know, if we run out of time and we don't get a chance to ask all your questions, Marilyn has agreed to have us email them and she will address them after this virtual town hall. So welcome, Marilyn. We're thrilled that you are here with us today.
Well, thank you very much, Carrie, and thank you to the Sarnia Lambton Chamber of Commerce for hosting this. I think this is a terrific forum to, hear what's happening on the federal level of Parliament and get a chance to ask the questions that are on everyone's mind. So to start out with, it's been a busy time in Parliament. There's a lot going on. President Biden visited us just a couple of weeks ago, and I had an opportunity actually to meet Jennifer Granholm and to talk about Line 5, which of course has been a concern of ours in Sarnia Lambton. The budget came down, budget 2023, so I know there is a question about the budget, and I'm going to go into detail about it when we get to that section. But certainly that was interesting. And then there are a huge number of government bills that are before us, and many of them are problematic. You may have heard about C11, the online censorship bill. There's also a bill, C18, that is supposed to protect local news and media outlets, which I think is important to everyone. But the way the bill has been drafted is problematic, and now Google and Facebook have threatened to not allow sharing of news links for Canadians. So working on that. I'm on the Heritage Committee right now, so we are doing a study of safe sport. You may have seen the issues with Hockey Canada and abuse, gang rapes, things that have gone on that have been awful. And in Gymnastics Canada, same thing happening. The women's soccer team, a lot of the issues going on there. So that's a really interesting study that we are doing. And then, as Carrie mentioned, I'm the Shadow Minister of Civil Liberties. And so certainly there's a lot of work to be done in order to try to keep the protection of our charter rights and freedoms. Some of you may be aware that there is currently before the Supreme Court, they're looking at whether or not the government met the threshold for the Emergency Measures Act legally. So that'll be interesting to watch. And in addition, the redrawing of the federal electoral boundaries is an exercise that happens every 10 years. And I am the lead for my party for Ontario. We have 122 ridings that will have their boundaries redrawn. And Sarnia Lambton will actually become Sarnia Lambton Bakeshwanong. So that'll take effect in 2024. And basically they have realigned the boundaries of our riding to align to Lambton County, which makes a lot of sense. Then, obviously, there are huge issues with cost of living. I'm getting calls every day at the office from people who can't afford to live. The food prices are up over 12%. We've got increase in carbon tax, payroll taxes, at a time when we have the highest inflation that we've had in 40 years. And so those, especially those on a fixed income, are really struggling. Seniors having to go back to work, losing their houses, the difficulty with the affordable housing crisis that is getting worse in Sarnia, I would say, with the rising cost of living. We're seeing more homeless. There's a 60% increase in food bank usage. And so the government really needs to come with remedies that will address the inflation and help to drive costs down. The cost of housing is a huge concern. The rents have doubled. When I got elected in 2015, it was $900 was the average rent. It's now $2,000 in Sarnia. And that's true across the country, that it's essentially doubled. Same with mortgage payments. Cost of houses doubled. So, this is a very difficult time, and our young people are losing their hope of ever owning a home. So that is certainly a concern. Another thing that is on the minds of many of us across the country is the addiction crisis that is also fueling an increase in crime and violent crime. There's been a 32% increase in violent crime in Canada in the last 7 years, and a 94% increase in gang crime. And I think we've all witnessed the news about the TTC and multiple stabbings. 40% of the violent crimes are actually stabbings. So this is hugely concerning. And then heartbreaking to see the addictions on the rise and the number of Canadians dying from overdoses and the lack of treatment and recovery options for people. And so that is sort of the backdrop of what has been happening. The Parliament right now is looking to address the Official Languages Act to try to protect language rights, but problematically, Quebec has introduced their Bill 96, and they've now inserted it in C11, which was a federal bill. So there's some controversy on that issue. And then you may have been aware as well that there was a bill brought forward, Bill C21, to eliminate handguns in Canada. And then an amendment was brought to eliminate hunting rifles, and that didn't go over very well. So that amendment was dropped. The increase in problems that we're seeing with files at the government is certainly taxing my office, as well as other people's offices. You know, there was a huge passport backlog where we couldn't get a passport within about 7 months. And so there's been some improvement in that, but immigration, there's a 2.5 million backlog in immigration. So the average time to get a permanent residence card is 59 months. And certainly, you know, that's causing a lot of trouble for people that are trying to reunite their families and come and settle in Sarnia. We've been very fortunate with the Ukrainians when the war between Russia and Ukraine began. I got together with all of the local support services because it wasn't clear who was doing what and how we would be able to work together in a coordinated way to bring as many Ukrainian families as possible to Sarnia, Lambton. But we've been able to bring about 200 families, and you may have seen the Save Ukraine Sarnia Lambton Facebook page, where now you're seeing regularly new families that are coming, that need things. Our generous community is reaching out, and so I'm really thrilled to see that is coming to the back. So that's what's going on from my perspective, and certainly I am happy to take all the questions that you have and go into some more detail about the budget.
Great. Thanks so much, Marilyn. And I will add too, before we jump into the questions, that Marilyn has always been really great in my time here at the Chamber. If we reach out to her with any questions, concerns, she gets back to us very quickly. And so I've always been really pleased with that, Marilyn, and I wanted to make sure people were aware of that. Okay, jumping into questions. When is Canada finally going to declare domestic violence an epidemic after the inquest that resulted in 86 recommendations addressing domestic violence in our country after the brutal death of 3 women by the same man? The recommendations have been published since July 2022, and not even a declaration has been made by our government.
This is a great question, and you know, I would say it's disappointing in the extreme that nothing has been done. During the pandemic, the increase in domestic violence was 32%. And when I was the chair of Status of Women back in 2015, we started our first study, which was on eliminating violence against women and girls. And there were 45 recommendations made, one of which was about domestic violence. Then another study was done when I was the chair of status of women just after the pandemic to look at the impacts of the pandemic. And again, those recommendations went to the government and they've done nothing. There's nothing in the budget that came out in terms of spending to help address these issues. There are no changes to the law that have been put forward. And so I think the government has really dropped the ball on something that is becoming a huge issue. 1 in 3 women in Canada will experience violence in their lifetime. And, domestic violence, it is, we're limited with shelter space. So, where do they go, and the effect on the families and the community as a whole is really stretching our resources. So I'll continue to raise that with the government, but nothing has been done.
Okay, thanks, Marilyn. The federal budget was released last month. What are your comments about the budget, and how do you see it impacting Sarnia Lambton?
This is a good question, and I'm going to spend some time. I'm not sure if everyone got a chance to read the 270 pages of the budget, so I'll give you the Coles notes, as we used to call them. So there are 6 themes in the budget. The first one is on affordability. And so as I talked about the cost of living issues that we're all seeing, it's believed by those who are in the know, the Bank of Canada, Mark Carney, economists, that what is fueling inflation in Canada is the deficit spending of the government. And that really, if we want to stop inflation, we're going to have to get spending under control. Unfortunately, in the budget, there's $63 billion of new spending. And I'm not sure that when Canadians look at what they're spending the money on, that we're really addressing, the needs of Canadians and the things that are priorities for us. Now, we know that the government just on April 1st increased the carbon tax again. And the carbon tax is fueling inflation because it's increasing the price of everything: fuel, home heating, groceries. And it's a total escalator, because if you think about it, from the time the farmer starts to farm, they're using fossil fuels, which have a carbon tax on them, to heat their barns, to drive their equipment. And then when the product goes to get processed, it has to be driven again. And so that carbon tax is on the fuel charges from the trucks that take it to processing, and then coming from the processing as well, and then on the trucks on the way to the grocery store, et cetera, et cetera. So affordability is huge, and I think it's recognized. 50% of Canadians cannot pay their bills today. There's a huge increase in the number of people who would not be able to pay an unexpected $500 bill. 20% of Canadians are skipping meals because they can't afford it. So I think the budget did not do justice to Canadians by increasing spending. Now, there is a grocery rebate of $234 for a single person. And the problem with that is that the parliamentary budget officer has said the cost of food is increasing $1,200 a person per year. So the government is taking more back than they are giving. And I think this is a Band-Aid solution and not a real solution to affordability. The second theme is health and dental care. I think this is a really important area. Canadians across all provinces and territories asked for more health transfers. The federal government gives about $40 billion in health transfers, and they've increased it. And I think that's money well spent. I think we have an aging population. 1 in 6 seniors will be 1 in 4 in about 4 more years. And so we're seeing a need for greater health spending. And I think everyone wants to make sure that those that don't have dental coverage have dental coverage. So there's $9 billion put for each year into the budget for dental care. But the government has not described yet what that program will look like. And I am a little concerned that a government that can't get a passport out the door, can't process a checklist for an immigration list, I mean, do we really want them handling the dental care for Canadians? So that is a concern. The third theme is affordable energy and clean energy. You know that we had Minister Wilkinson come to Sarnia and talk about the just transition. And we expressed very clearly to him the concerns of our community about job loss and making sure that this is done. Well, they've taken the words just transition out of their vocabulary, and now they're couching this in different terms. This whole affordable energy, clean energy tax incentive is part of what we expect Minister Wilkinson to bring forward later in the year. But it's really not a lot of tangible money. It's a lot of incentive credits for green technology, and I'm not sure they'll be effective. The US has put in place an Inflation Recovery Act, which is poorly named because it's going to be $400 billion of infused cash that will drive inflation, not reduce it. But what's happening then is they're subsidizing their green energy move in the US, and they don't have a carbon tax, they don't have any of these other regulatory burdens. So I'm not sure that we're going to be competitive with the incentives that are there. They've also decided to put $15 billion more into the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, which has never delivered a single project. Again, that's money I don't consider to be well spent. And they've created a $15 billion Canadian Growth Fund that has no specific mandate. We don't really know whether it's the government picking winners and losers or how that will work. But again, I don't think that will be effective. There is a theme about reconciliation and building a Canada that works for everyone. Honestly, they still haven't addressed boiled water advisories for our Indigenous friends across the country. It's 2023. I can't imagine there being any priority that would be higher than that, and they failed to do that. So we need to do that. And we do need to build a Canada that works for everyone, but there was really nothing in there for seniors. Seniors are struggling right now. They're on a fixed income. Many of them are too frail to go back to work. So that is a huge issue. And on the other end of the thing, young people are really struggling. The cost of living going up, student debt, inability to get a house. It's a huge issue. So I didn't really think there was much in that one. Leadership in the world. Honestly, Canada is losing its allies and friends. We're a member of NATO, but we're supposed to donate 2% of our GDP, and we have failed again in this budget to meet the demands that President Biden has asked for, that our partners in NATO have asked for. We see that Canada wasn't invited to the discussions with our other allied partners. They're very concerned about the Chinese influence in Canada. You have heard lots about Chinese interference in our elections and concern about multiple communist police stations across the country that have been allowed on our sovereign land, and the government does not seem to be acting very quickly to address these things. These are concerns for our allies as well, and so we do need to step up and show more leadership, and especially with the balloons, these balloons that have been shot down in Alaska and in Yukon and in the US and everything else. There is concern about sovereignty, protecting our Arctic sovereignty, and there was really no spending to address any of that. And then effective government and a fair tax system. If 50% of Canadians can't pay their bills and the government is increasing the carbon tax, but the carbon tax is doing nothing. It is not reducing emissions. They're failing to meet their emissions targets. It's a tax plan. And other G7 nations have recognized that with the inflation that's going on, they have cut taxes on all the essentials, groceries, fuel, home heating, all those kinds of things. And I think that's what Canada should do as well. So all in all, not really seeing the things that we would like to see in Sarnia. The things that we were looking for were affordable housing, money to go do that. Now, the government has brought 1 million people to Canada last year through immigration and the students and temporary foreign workers. 1 million people. And their plan is to spend $1.5 billion to create 4,500 affordable spaces. Where are people going to live? It's out of control. they have put another $4 billion in there to remove barriers so that they might be able to build 100,000 units. Again, the math doesn't work. If you're going to have 500,000 immigrants come in and then additional ones temporarily on top of that, and already we don't have enough spaces to live, we're just not accelerating the building of affordable housing spaces. And there's nothing in this budget to say that. The beer and wine escalator, I just have to put in a plug here. Parliament voted in the majority to eliminate this 6.4% escalator tax that was going to come into play on April the 1st. And the government reduced it to 2%, but they did not respect the will of Parliament, which was that it would be 0. So that was not good. And then the punishment continues for the agriculture sector. We've got the carbon tax costing, you know, by the time they get to their max $170 per ton, the average farmer will be paying $150,000 in carbon tax. The clean fuel standard on top of that, $130,000 they'll be paying for that. And that's just going to drive up the price of food. There are tariffs on fertilizer, and the government is restricting the amount of fertilizer farmers can use, which causes them to have to, you know, farm more land and use more fossil fuels. So it's just really punishing to see agriculture in Canada at a time when we should be feeding the world. So that was a disappointment. And then we've made some specific asks for the budget. Shoreline erosion is a big deal for Sarnia Lambton. We probably need $150 million to fix all of the different emergency areas, and there was no money for that. Transportation has been raised again and again. We have no air service and we have terrible rail service. But there's nothing in the budget. There's $40 million in total for the whole Quebec-Windsor corridor, and then nothing outside of that. So I think that that's not good news for us. And it doesn't sound like we're getting any money for airport funding anytime soon. We did get some in the last budget, but I would have liked to have seen some more. So that's kind of the Cole's notes on what came out in the budget for us.
Great, thanks, Marilyn. Next question, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce and the Sarnia Lambton Chamber of Commerce, as you know, Marilyn, we did reach out to you, were alarmed to learn about a motion brought forward to the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. It raised concerns about a serious threat to the privacy of Canadians and to their rights to hold and express opinions on public issues. Can you give us an update on what is happening with this motion?
Yes, this is a motion that was brought by Chris Biddle, the member for St. Catharines. And essentially it had to do with Meta, Facebook, and Google. And we were trying to bring them to committee on this bill that is intended to help local media, but it's not actually going to accomplish that. And they've demanded all internal and external communications from these companies on what they planned to do about C18. So any communications within the company or externally to the company that had to do with C18. And this is a huge invasion and violation of privacy laws. Businesses have every right to look at what the government of the day is proposing and to make a plan to react to it. And the government shouldn't be using their powers to force people to bring that forward. My expectation would be that there would be punitive measures taken if someone didn't agree with the government of the day. That's communism. That is certainly not what we want in Canada. Conservatives voted against the motion, but the other parties all voted for it. And so the only modification they made is that they limited it to the internal communications of the company, which I still think is an invasion of privacy.
Okay, thank you. And you did touch base a little bit on this previously around the transportation issue. The lack of transportation in and out of Sarnia Lambton is a barrier for not only existing local businesses and community members, that has also been identified as a deterrent for potential business development. The government has made several announcements over the past few months with new transportation initiatives in the surrounding areas of the 402 corridors. but seems that they keep forgetting about businesses here in between Sarnia and London, except for the one train in and one train out every day from Sarnia. When will we see some action from the government to help solve this major issue? And do you know if Via Rail will be providing any more reliable and frequent services in and out of Sarnia Lambton?
Thanks for the question. As you know, I used to be the co-chair for Parliamentary Rail, and so I developed a good relationship with VIA to raise this point frequently. But at one point, they were doing an experiment with a smaller type of train to go back and forth between Sarnia and London so that they could increase the frequency. But they finished the trials and didn't take it any further. And so finally, there was concern because the freight volume is up. And what happens is the freight ends up blocking the passenger trains so that the passenger trains don't run on time. And CN makes 5 times more profit off of freight cars than they do off of passenger rail. So they don't have an incentive to cooperate, if you will. So the idea was that if we took trains and took them from Wyoming to London, that we would be out of that congested area, and then perhaps a shuttle service could be run. But although the ideas have been put forward, and certainly the Sarnia community is interested, Petroy is interested, Lambton College is interested to try to increase this, there's no movement on VIA's part, and the government has not put anything in place. I raised it to the transportation minister, but I would say that the transportation minister is making a big mess everywhere. I mean, if you've seen Pearson Airport and all the things that have gone on with air service these days in Canada, it is, we are with 3 of the worst airports in the world: Pearson, Vancouver, and Montreal. And I think this government is not addressing the needs adequately. That said, I've had conversations with Porter and WestJet trying to restore the air service to Sarnia, and also getting hooked up with the Hamilton Airport that does a lot of the freight cargo, because they're getting to capacity and we could be a partner with them. So there are things that are, you know, percolating, but nothing that has come forward that will help the situation in the near term.
Okay, thank you. What do you see as one of the biggest issues impacting employers locally? And are there any supports the government can offer to support small businesses with these challenges?
Well, I hear sort of 3 main challenges from local businesses. The first one is finding people to hire. Everybody is looking for people to hire, and it doesn't seem like there's anybody available to work. And you know, that at a time when there's 1 million people collecting unemployment insurance in the country. So there's definitely a mismatch there. Part of the solution is immigration, you know, people that have the skills and talent to fill the jobs that we have. And the other thing is a recertification. We're missing doctors and nurses in this country and personal support workers, but we've got about 50,000 people living in Canada that have these credentials from other countries that are not recognized here. So I think there's a lot that we could do to accelerate getting those people to work, and that would be helpful. The other thing is the margins. Because of the increase in taxes like the carbon tax, businesses are squeezed on the margin, especially agricultural businesses. The other thing I would say is restaurants and tourism are impacted by things like the escalator tax. I think you may have seen the article in the paper with Ups and Downs commenting on, you know, how this is going to impact their business. So I think the removal of tax barriers would be helpful. And then finally, there's a lot of regulatory burden. It seems more and more difficult to find your way through the government and all of the approvals that you have to get to get a business even started here locally. So those would be the 3 things that I think businesses need. And there are helps. Usually whenever there is an issue, they raise it sometimes to me, and I will connect them with individuals that are hiring or have a special skill set, put them in touch with ways that they can get business supports from the government, starting new businesses, funding. There's a number of envelopes that are available, and I'm always happy to connect people up.
Great, thank you. Homelessness is at the forefront of everyone's mind. What do you see as an important new innovation to address homelessness?
Well, I don't think it's innovation that is needed. I think that you have to address the roots, and there's a number of them. So one of the roots, of course, is the lack of affordable housing, which we already talked about. Now, we have taken some actions in Sarnia to help address this. They're building a 40-unit space next to the Salvation Army. There's another 40-unit space going in on Maxwell that will be affordable housing units. The college is building affordable spaces for students, which will free up other affordable housing, but it's just not happening at the rate it needs to. And at the same time, the cost of living increases are causing more homeless people. So while typically we would have had about 170 homeless in Sarnia, that went to a high of 420 in the pandemic and is now back around 220. So I think Valerie Colasanti and the people from the County of Lambton that work with the City of Sarnia do an excellent job of trying to place people, but essentially they're placing them in hotels quite often, which is not a long-term, sustainable answer. The other thing we have to get at is the root of homelessness, because it's not just the cost of living. Many of these individuals then, fall into mental health issues, depression, addiction, and that is just a death spiral, because Blue Water Health had indicated that at one point they were turning away up to 20 people a day because they did not have enough detox capacity. So I'm glad to see more capacity get introduced there. But then that's a short-term solution, and then you need a recovery bed. And we've got Ryan's Home, which is an excellent solution. But that's it, 10 beds for Sarnia Lambton. So I have asked Carolyn Bennett, the Minister of Addictions, to work with us to try to create a facility between here and London that could be shared for this area, because we are underserved, and that's compared to other areas that would consider themselves underserved in terms of help for those that are battling addictions. So really, I mean, those are some of the roots. The other solution to homelessness is a good job. And so we have some exciting new businesses opening up, and we hope to see an increase in that. I mean, the distillery that's opening up in St. Clair Township with our Origin Materials, that will be starting up shortly, and the expansion from Nova. So we hope to continue to see job creation, but certainly I would expect with a recession happening this year, we are going to continue to battle this homelessness thing for a number of years.
Okay, thanks, Marilyn. What are you doing to advocate to keep youth? And we hear this, just to preface this question, I know we hear it often, I'm sure you've heard it, that we have a really difficult time here in Sarnia Lambton retaining our youth. So what are you doing to advocate to keep our youth here? And this question specifically asks around LGBTQ plus youth to live, work, and thrive in our community.
Yeah, I meet with the LGBTQ groups in various ways, but what I hear consistently is that they have a need for more mental health supports. They have a need to be accepted in the community, and there's still issues of violence against the LGBTQ, and an isolation that happens in the rural parts of the riding. There isn't adequate transportation. There's a lot of activity going on to create a community like a Rebound, where Carrie would know very well that there's excellent programs going on there, but really hard for people that are out in the country, in the county, to get in to those. So that's a limitation. And I think that the events that increase awareness and tolerance, the Pride Fest event, you know, creating the crosswalks. I mean, it's symbolic in some way, but I think it creates a message that, you know, they are welcome in Sarnia, Lambton, and we are creating spaces for them here. So I think we just need to continue on the path that we're going there.
Okay, thank you. There is solid research to show that 90% of Canadians belong to no political party, that 64% of those who do not belong would never consider joining, and 60% of Canadians think politicians want donations and votes, but not real dialogue with citizens. What practical ideas might you have to motivate citizens to re-engage in our political processes and have real dialogue with our elected representatives towards a stronger democracy?
Well, this is a great question. And so this forum is a great example of an opportunity to meet and to listen and hear what the questions are and what's going on. But what I would say is I do pride my office on responding. People call, people email, people message, we respond immediately. You would find that across the rest of the MPs, this is not common. Sometimes you never get a response back from them. We try to respond to every person. And they don't always like the response, but, you know, at least the dialogue. And then sending out mailers to invite input. It's free to mail it back. So that's a way of getting input as well and dialogue. But I think until we start to see our politicians actually answer the questions, it's very frustrating to me to see the government either not answering the questions or lying to Canadians continually. And this is just not acceptable. And it erodes people's trust in the whole democratic process. And then when you see, I don't know if you heard that the new ethics commissioner is Minister Dominic LeBlanc's sister-in-law. Well, come on, this is a minister that was involved in the clam scam. You remember, gave $25 million a clam quota to another member of his family's business that didn't even have a boat and got charged by the ethics commissioner at the time. So it's a conflict of interest for him to have the ethics commissioner be his sister-in-law. That's just obvious to everyone that's looking at it, but apparently not to the government. And again, with the special rapporteur, you know, I've got a lot of respect for the Right Honorable David Johnston. He was a former Governor General, but he was on the Trudeau Foundation that accepted money from Beijing. He can't be the one to be investigating interference from the Chinese in the elections. And there doesn't seem to be a recognition in government that they need to be held to high standards. There needs to be transparency, and there needs to not be conflict of interest or corruption. And until we can start to see that, people are disengaging. They're saying, I'm not going to vote because I don't like anybody. I think they're all bad. And certainly, you know, I certainly hear that on my social media.
Okay, thanks, Marilyn. Our Ontario OHIP medical coverage is partially provided by our federal government, and therefore the feds do have a major influence over our provincial medical coverage. Our OHIP does not cover us in other provinces. We are required to purchase out-of-province medical coverage to visit family in BC, Alberta, etc. This is wrong. Our whole OHIP coverage should be good all across Canada, including any Canadian province. Agreed, we must purchase extra medical coverage to travel in the USA, but our OHIP should be good in every province in Canada. The federal government can and should make this happen. Will you bring this matter to the appropriate context to see if changes can be made?
Absolutely, I will. When I was the Shadow Minister of Health, I was very concerned about the Canada Health Act not actually being adhered to, because the Canada Health Act says that healthcare should be universal, it should be portable, it should be accessible by all. And so people should be able to go from province to province and get coverage, but they can't. And in addition to that, there's not even the same drugs available, medications. So there's some people that are having to move to a different province to get coverage for the medication that they need because it's not available in another province. That makes no sense. The country should harmonize the list of approved medications, and there are a number of issues like that. Now, I was very surprised when I was in that role because I was under the impression that privatization of healthcare was like taboo. I had always heard that here, and then I started to go around the country and I found that it's everywhere, and in many cases coming with good results. And then I found out in Sarnia, like, we have it already. If you go to Life Labs to get a blood test, that's actually a privatized service. Sarnia Diagnostic Clinic to get an X-ray, it's a privatized service. The province pays them directly, so people don't have to pay. And I think that's a key tenet of our healthcare system. So we want everyone to have access and not to have to pay for it. But I think there is an opportunity for us to look at other countries that have better healthcare outcomes than we do. Japan, France, Sweden are the top 3 for outcomes in terms of low wait times, low mortality rates, and lower costs, better technology. And so they've got a mixture of privatized and public services that they use. I think that our healthcare system needs more money, but I think it also needs to transition from what was set up to be an acute care system, right? Accidents and response that way, to more of a chronic care, because as you have an aging population, you have more chronic disease. And that is more expensive, which would say that you should spend more money on prevention. So, for example, 11 million Canadians have diabetes or pre-diabetes. And so there's a lot that can be done with type 2 diabetes to prevent onset by exercise and diet and all that kind of thing. And that starts at a younger age. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in our healthcare system, but it will need more money. And in order to put more money into it, Canada has to start taking advantage of the opportunities we have to get more money. We turned down a contract with Germany that wanted to buy our LNG for $59 billion. $59 billion, that's more than the health transfers for the whole country. We did the same for Japan. They wanted to offer us a similar sum. So if you did those 2 deals, you really could triple the amount of money in the healthcare system and address some of the inequities that exist. And it gets worse as you go more rural, right? I mean, in rural Canada, there's very few services available and very difficult access. So I'm happy to advocate on that one. I'm passionate on that.
Wonderful. Thanks, Marilyn. Women identifying and LGBTQ+ entrepreneurs were disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 across Canada. What can be done to support these individuals in Sarnia, Lambton?
Well, there is a couple of things. Now, the government did not follow up on the recommendations that we made that women and LGBTQ+ were, disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, and so the government should have some kind of fund. They did not do anything on that, but there is a community capacity fund to help the LGBTQ community, and so I've reached out to Crystal Fox, who is the lead over the group in Sarnia, to indicate that the applications are due by May the 9th, and certainly that would be a good way of getting some help. The general funds don't favor women or LGBTQ in the way they select. And the criteria that they've focused on in this budget year is they want Black entrepreneurs and Indigenous entrepreneurs is where the government is focusing their attention. So I do think that more needs to be done, but there's nothing available currently.
Okay. This goes back to the housing piece. The lack of local supportive housing is destroying the lives of some of the most vulnerable people in our community. A group of local not-for-profits, including the Rotary Club of Sarnia, is working with the County of Lambton to find a best-in-class solution. What role could you play to help secure federal funding for such a project?
Well, I'm already playing a role because I work with the County of Lambton and these various partners on the different projects. And we have brought money for affordable housing, several $1 million that has come in already, and we have requested more. But there's a number of different initiatives. I talked about some of the affordable spaces that are being developed at the college, doing their thing. There's also a pilot for the tiny homes that is being worked on by the city of Sarnia. And then looking at where to build the affordable housing. There is some discussion about the property that's the industrial complex out by where the Carpenters local is, that really hasn't sort of caught on as an industrial complex yet. That would be a great place to build a lot of higher rise apartments that could be on a bus route. So there's a number of ideas, and all of these ideas we try to go match up with the government funds. Unfortunately, like I said, although there was billions and billions of dollars of spend announced, it's not going where it needs to go. They should have taken that 15 billion slush fund world growth and said, let's donate that back to municipalities to work on affordable housing, because that's what we need.
Okay, thanks, Marilyn. There is a question actually in the chat box that I thought is very timely. Is there buried anywhere in the budget funds for medium and smaller companies to get training dollars to be able to upscale and reskill their current staff?
That is a good question. Let me just pull up my little copy of the budget here. There is training money in there, but it's really directed more for skilled trades. I will take a look in the detail level. It's Dale from Sarnia Blue Water, right? Let me write that one down.
I can send that to you, Marilyn, if you'd like.
Yeah, because I think a more detailed answer is warranted there. There was money for training in the budget, but I believe it was skilled trades only targeted. There's a couple more questions, I think, in the chat.
Yes, and there's a couple people have actually posted a couple suggestions. So that's great, Rob and John, thanks for that. Who in government needs to be reacting to the AI issues that have recently surfaced? I saw a report this morning. The Chat GPT was released in November and now has 100 million users. It has the potential to affect every business. That is a great question.
It is a great question, and I would say we've got inadequate response from the government. You know, they took a step to ban TikTok from government platforms because of the Chinese interference, and then there was a concern about WeChat, but these programs just keep coming out and out and out, and the government has not got the ability to respond, which they need to have. I mean, they need to get with the program. It's a digital age, and so we've got to react. There's a digital bill before the House, but it doesn't address this, and they don't have the resources in-house to address it. Goodwill Industries on London Road has a program to subsidize training. Oh, okay, cool.
So another question that was put in the chat, any news on COVID loans coming due in December?
Yes. Now, this, I don't know what everyone else thinks, but for me, at the beginning when these COVID loans were put out there, there was an expectation that the business loans were going to have to be repaid, but not the first $10,000. But for the CERB benefits, nobody ever said that you're going to have to pay that back. And nobody ever said it was going to be taxed. And these are things that came along sort of after the fact. And now we have a lot of people that really can't afford to pay this money back that are on the hook. And I believe the numbers are $15 billion of COVID benefits that went out the door to ineligible people that the government doesn't know if it's worth the time to try to get that money back. And 27 billion that went to businesses that weren't eligible. That again, you know, they should be looking to get back. But yeah, the businesses are saying that they need longer to recover. That COVID, they had projected that depending on the sector you were in, restaurant sectors were expected to take about 2 years to bounce back, and other sectors longer or shorter. But really, the pandemic changed people's behavior. And so people, for example, in the restaurant industry, the expectation was that people were going to return to the former pre-pandemic levels of eating out. That hasn't happened. It hasn't happened not only because people got out of the habit of going out for dinner and started cooking at home, but also because with the cost of living increase and the subsequent increases in restaurant charges, which they have to charge because the food is more expensive, people are less able to go out, and so their recovery is going to take longer.
And one last question. Do you have an approximate timeline on the passage of the 2023 budget?
I do. They have to pass it by the time we rise in June, or they can't function. So we know that there'll be a lot of pressure to get that bill through. The Senate sits until after the budget is passed. That's the last thing that they have to do before we rise for the summer.
Wonderful. That's great. And like I said in the beginning, if anyone has any questions that they thought of after or during this, please send them to the chamber and we'll make sure Marilyn gets them. And I know Marilyn's office is always, Marilyn and her team are always amazing to get back to us quickly. So thank you, Marilyn. I know that you have a busy schedule and we really, really appreciate you being here today with us and giving us some information.
Well, I want to thank everybody for taking their time to come, and honestly, my door is open, my phone is accessible. People are coming to me in various ways, but I always want to respond and make sure that you get answers to your questions. And a lot of times I can learn more about what's available by the questions you ask. So thanks a lot.
Great. Thanks, Marilyn. Thanks everybody for joining us today.